I'm working for the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Seville. And today I represent this joint work together with Marta and Mara and Margaret, are my former colleagues at Polytechnic. So in this case, we're still talking about the effect of Covid-19 on student performance, but we want to address the lack on the literature in understand a little bit more the variability of the learning loss between schools in Italy. And we try to explain this variability, integrating the INVALSI data database with a novel source of data that is based on a survey we collect here illustrated in 2020. So I will skip this part since we are talking about COVID-19 like for the last two papers. I think the other presenter, they've been super good in explaining all the main literature. So basically what we found in the literature that yes, there is a negative effect of COVID-19 on student learning, but this is also it's different, the extent of this effect compared for different countries, and of course for different subjects. This is also very true for readings. In this perspective, we find out that for some, we have some studies that highlight that has not been a significant effect in readings. But what we want to address as the main gap in this paper is the fact that still in the literature there is not a great understanding on the variability of the learning loss across schools. And of course, this is super important because this variability would be somehow related to some teachers, school principals factors, but also to digital technologies and many other important factors that could be also related to educational policies. So there are a couple of papers that indeed highlighted that in other countries have been you can find a great variability of the learning loss between schools, but still there is it's not really explored the reason behind this variability. And we try to do that by using this new data by a survey we collected. We have this in 2020. So we have studied, of course, the case of Italy. We know, of course, it is very important also because not only Italy was the first country hit by the pandemic in 2020 in Europe, but also we know that before the COVID-19 pandemic, Italy was not super prepared in dealing with this school closure, no? Because indeed in 2020 we know that Italy was reporting one of the lowest digital economy and society index in Europe, in European countries. But also from Tali's data, we know that the Italian teachers had only a little experience in the use of digital technologies before the pandemic. So this is why the case of Italy is very interesting. And we know now, of course, now we are here to talk about this new research about the learning loss in Italy, because we have INVALSI data starting from 2021. But still, we don't have so many published papers on the case of Italy. And so we want to investigate these main problems for Italy still, because it's an important case and we still need additional evidence in the research. So in particular, we have three research questions. So the first one is our starting point, of course. It's the same for everybody here in this room. So what is the extent of the learning loss for Italian students with COVID-19 emergency? But then we want to explore a little bit more this variability across schools. So how does learning loss vary across schools, and how the different school characteristics and remote teaching practices influence the learning loss? As I said before, for doing this, for analyzing these research questions, we are merging two different data sources. One is, of course, INVALSI database of 2021. We use this source of data, of course, for the test scores and also for the main controls and student characteristics. we are interested in particular in grade 5 and grade 8 students, so elementary school and middle school in Italy. And here we are not only analyzing readings and mathematics, but also we are also analyzing the effect on English, in particular English reading and listening. Then we match, in order to have also an explanation on how really teachers conduct their remote teaching activities during the school closure, we match this data with information we collected through a survey that we implemented in 2020. This survey was aimed to teachers, and they are referring to the same sample of INVALSI database. So here we are based on the same national representative sample selected by INVALSI in 2020. To better maybe visualize how we match these two different sources of data, here we have a timeline. So the reference period for our survey, of course, is the main school closure. For middle school and elementary school, that's been quite homogeneous, of course, for these grades, and has been from March 2020 until June 2020. Then we administrated our survey in July 2020, so literally after this school period, during the summer break. And we start to follow the students in this representative sample of school the year after. In 2021, we can measure then the performance of students through the INVALSI test. And of course, in this case, it's a middle term effect, so because we can measure the effect only 1 year after the pandemic. But basically, we have the same students. We can follow the same students that in 2020 were in grade 4 and 7, and then the year after are in grade 5 and 8, that of course are the grades when we have the INVALSI test. So for the INVALSI database, we have a full availability. In the case of the survey, since it is a survey, we have not full availability because the response rate was around 1/3 of the teachers. So as empirical strategy. So the first step of our empirical strategy wants to estimate the learning loss. So first of all, we started with our starting point for everybody, no? So measuring this learning loss at average. And for doing this, I will not repeat so much because also the other presenters were super good in explaining their strategy. But then we are comparing different cohorts. In this case, we are using, of course, the COVID cohorts of students in 2021. And we are comparing with two pre-COVID cohorts of students. In particular, our model is described by this equation. Our coefficient of interest is exactly COVID, the C here in the equation, that is equal to 1 when the student is part of the COVID course, and is 0 otherwise, so is part of the control group, the control course. And then, of course, we control for the main vector of student characteristics. We are doing this separately for each grade, so grade 5 and grade 8, and for all the subjects, so English, mathematics, and reading. In order to balance the samples, the control group and the COVID group cohorts, of course, we are balancing the sample because also we know that there have been some difference in terms of main student characteristics, and for doing this, in this case, we are using propensity score weights. Then, of course, we had to, of course, the previous equation allows to have just one estimate, the estimate for each grade, for each subject about a general learning loss. But we are interested here in measuring the learning loss for each school. So for doing that, we have to move to a multi-level approach. In particular, multi-level mixed model that, in this case, we are adding, we are changing the equation before, to adding a random part. This, our variable of interest is allowed to vary for each school. We are also, as alpha 0, we are also including a random intercept. This allows to take into account a general school value added that we know from literature to be very relevant, that, however, is not related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this case, our estimates of school level effect of COVID-19 is at the net of a general school value added that is not related to the COVID-19 school closure. Then, finally, at the second step, we use these school level estimates of the effect of COVID-19 and as a dependent variable, and we want to explain this variability by including also the information in our survey. In this case, as said, we are using a subsample because we don't have all the data for all the classes and all the schools, because we have just about 1/3 of respondents. So for correcting, in this case, a possible bias in the respondents, so of course it could be the case that the teacher that decided to respond to the survey, that we were also the best teacher in terms of behavior. For correcting for this possible bias, self-selection bias, we decide to use this inverse probability treatment weighting, and this try to correct this possible bias in the data. Then, going to the results. Here is the first set of results. Here we have the general effect, the average effect of COVID-19 on students' performance, and we have it for readings, mathematics, English reading, and English listening for each grade. So grade 5, elementary school, grade 8, middle school. For better visualize the effect, we can use this plot. In this case, we are plotting just, of course, our variable of our coefficient of interest. And here what we can find is that, indeed, at elementary school, the effect of readings and mathematics was not so significant. And for reading, indeed, we have a positive effect. It seems to be a learning gain. It still is not significant in terms of our analysis. Then, when we move to English, we have an opposite situation. And we found that at elementary school, the learning loss has been quite substantial, and especially for English reading, where in terms of standard deviation, this effect was almost 0.3 standard deviations. So it's the opposite situation, and the opposite situation we can find the same for the middle school. At grade 8, we have a significant learning loss, so a negative effect of COVID-19 on students' achievement for readings and mathematics. But we don't have it the same for English. In this case, at grade 8, we cannot find a significant effect for English. Then I will be super quick in this, because this is, of course, we are also interested a little bit to explore the heterogeneity between different groups of students. We know that this is the main aim for also other researchers, so, and this is probably not our main contribution. But then, of course, we use some interaction to have an overview about the heterogeneity across different groups of students. In this case, what I think is quite interesting is that, for example, of course, the socioeconomic status is positive, the interaction is always positive, and this is true for all grades and all subjects, so also for English here. As you can see, it's always positive and significant. This means, of course, that the students with higher socioeconomic status have found a lower learning loss or higher learning gain, of course. Also interesting that in our case we found that in mathematics at grade 8, so at the middle school, females are also the one reporting a larger learning loss. And this is particularly critical because we know that in mathematics we have this gender gap in education in school. And so this means that somehow the COVID-19 pandemic has enlarged this gender gap, and this is quite critical. So finally we go to our estimates at the school level. This is the plots of our estimates at school level of the learning loss for each subject and grade. Of course, here we cannot more differentiate between English reading and listening, because then we have only one teacher that of course is teaching English. And so, as you can see, we have a very high variability of the learning loss at the elementary school. And this is quite, for example, if we go for reading where we didn't find any significant effect, we see that this not significant effect on average is could be somehow hidden by a large heterogeneity between schools, where some schools are also performing very, very bad. So with a learning loss, this is very high, very, very important. Also around 2 standard deviations, so very, very important. While for the middle school, the heterogeneity between schools is not so large as for elementary school. Still, we can see quite heterogeneity, but is not so high as for elementary school. Then still using the data in the INVALSI database for having the whole sample. Here we want a little bit to understand this variability with in the whole sample, so with the INVALSI data. And what I think is quite interesting is that for elementary school, the schools with larger learning loss are the ones that in the year before the pandemic were performing better. So here we have a negative effect of the pre-COVID schools. And this is true for elementary school, but we don't find these effects for middle school, so for grade 8. So now we can match these data, these estimates with the information we have in the survey. In particular, the survey allowed to collect some data about how it was the teaching behavior during COVID-19 pandemic. And in particular, we have 3 groups of variables. We have the variable related to the remote teaching tools. So we have which tools they use for synchronous and asynchronous classes, so online, live classes or offline, but of course using digital support. Then we ask students how they evaluate their students, and also if they receive some support from the school principal about how to implement digital and online classes during this period, if they were able to start within 1 week after the first day of school closure the online synchronous classes, and around how many hours of synchronous classes they were conducted per week. So this is the result of the ODS regression that matching where we are using as a predictor the survey variables. And we can see that we have a quite heterogeneous situation according to the subject and to the grade. In particular, looking at the first group of variables, so what were like the digital tools used by the teachers, the variability is very high, and somehow I like the fact that probably the best tool was really according to the grade, the age of the students, the subject that the teacher was teaching. And it's difficult to find out a really best practice in this context. But also imagine that, for example, in reading, for reading at grade 8, these tools were quite important in also determining the learning loss and the performance of students. For the student assessment, it's also quite interesting that it was quite relevant how teachers assess the students. And for example, in general, we found out that assessing the student through homework was not so, was also in some cases related to associated to a negative effect in the performance of students. So it was not effective. And this is true, especially for English. It's not super significant for readings. But the opposite situation we have it for mathematics at grade 8. And here, also here, we have to consider the mathematics probably for more analytical nature of this subject could be worked as an opposite. Probably in this case, homework were working better in this case and is associated to a positive effect. While for mathematics, but for younger students, in mathematics were more effective using, for example, oral tests or also assessing the student through the attendance to classes. At the end, as quite predictable, we found out that the support from the school principal about how to organize the classes, the online classes, was positively related to the students' results. And this is particularly true for middle school, so for grade 8, and also a quick start of online classes was quite important for determining higher students' performance in this period. So, going to the last slides, I would summarize the main takeaways of our paper. We found that elementary school, after the COVID-19 school closure on reading and mathematics achievement was quite limited. And this is probably because in this case, learning loss seems to be mitigated by family support, and especially for the advantaged students, so the students with higher socioeconomic status. But also, we should also take into consideration that this average effect could hide a large heterogeneity across schools, and this is something that we should consider. Then also a main takeaway of also compared to the research we have now in Italy is that when we study the effect on English, we found out a completely opposite situation. So in this case, the younger students were more affected than the pupils in the middle schools. And this is, we try to understand why, and we have some hypotheses. For example, it could be the case that regarding English, parents could be less prepared in support their children compared to reading and mathematics. And also because probably English needs more social and practical activities compared to reading and mathematics. Also, on the other hand, older students are more autonomous and could have improved English also through not academic channels. For example, just watching a movie on original language on Netflix, or listening to music in English. And this is something that, of course, is more frequent for older students. And also, to explain this large learning loss we found for English at elementary school, we should also consider the fact that also when they came back to traditional classes, they were wearing this mask. And also, this is not, you cannot observe the articulation of the words of the teachers, and this could be very important when you're teaching foreign languages, and especially for younger students. And also, of course, one main takeaway of our research is that we found out high between school variation in the learning loss, and especially at grade 5, so elementary school. And this is probably because also elementary school, the students are super young and they were not prepared how to really have online classes. And we found out, looking also at the data of the survey, that the behavior of the teacher were very heterogeneous. So in some schools, in some classes, teachers were not performing like synchronous online classes. In another, yes. While in the middle school, of course, you have more structured. The organization of the education is a little bit different. The students are older. In this case, there's been like also some policies that were common for all the schools. Then we found out that how the teachers evaluated their students, the school principal support and quick start of the online classes were very important in order to they were important to factor for explaining the learning loss of the students. And digital tools are also very important, but it's difficult to find out a best practice, identify a best practice in this case, because it's very related to the subject and the grades of the class. And so these are maybe takeaways. I think this can provide some very useful information also for policymakers in order to also target the strategies for reducing the learning gap in Italy, and also to somehow have some information about the main factors that could be help to reduce the learning loss and to have better student performance during this post-COVID period. Thank you.